Thanks, Malaz. Yeah, and definitely eat, stand in line. The less you see, the less anxious I am. And also, I just want to say that I'm an affiliate of CBMI, and I love HSR&D as well. So I do have this connection, I think, to all the centers, and I appreciate that Malaz pointed that out. So okay, here's the thing I want to talk to you about today. But first, my disclosure statement. And this is a fun one, so those of you in line should look at it because it's very cute. I started doing this because I've never really had any disclosures, but I always felt like I needed that slide, and I thought I'd at least make you chuckle. So that's what I do. If you don't know, if you've never seen me talk before, I put a funny cat picture on the disclosure slide because they say laughter is the best medicine. And that's my segue to the talk on anticholinergic medications. So just by show of hands, if you're not holding a pizza in one of them, how many of you have heard of or understand anticholinergic medications? Half of the room, and actually this side of I wonder why. And then how many of you who raised your hands learned about anticholinergics through contact or going to a talk, somebody related to Regenstrief? Yeah, so a lot. And so this is actually how I came into it as well. I had no idea what an anticholinergic was. In fact, the first time somebody told me that word, A, it took me a long time to really be able to pronounce it, but B, I had to go and look at all the medications in my cabinet to see which one of them said anticholinergic, and it turns out none, because that's not an actual drug ingredient, obviously. But I came in kind of 2014 or so, 2015, not knowing what it was, and now I'm doing research on the topic. And so for those of you who didn't raise your hand, I'll give you a little bit of an informal introduction. Anticholinergics are a class of medications. They're treating all sorts of different symptoms, and they're considered potentially inappropriate medication for older adults. They are on the Beers list of inappropriate medications that's maintained by the American Geriatric Society. And so they're kind of a high-risk drug, among others, that should not be used by older adults if there's an alternative treatment available. And the reason is that these medications, if taken over a period of time, can cause short-term and long-term harmful effects for older adults related to brain function and brain harm. And so there's been some actually amazing work that I've been now reading about over the years that's been done here. People like Malaz and Noel Campbell and Susan Rissacker and others showing that there is a dose-response relationship between these medications, using these medications, and the level of cognitive impairment, including dementia that people have. And then, of course, a really interesting recent study that you might have heard about showing brain atrophy among older adult anticholinergic users who are normally cognitively normal. And I remember seeing this headline after Susan's paper came out, Sharon's paper came out on medications that harm the brain. And I think it was surprising to me too at the time that it wasn't just prescription meds, which we all know have side effects of some sort, but also over-the-counter medications, which a lot of us maybe assume are safe because the FDA has said we no longer need to regulate it, we can put it on the shelves. But then as soon as I learned about anticholinergics, I started seeing them everywhere. And so, this is a National Academy of Medicine report, and you can see anticholinergics is all over it. The report's not about medications, it's about cognitive aging and potential harm to older adults and their brain, including these medications. So you start seeing it everywhere, including the Indianapolis airport. You go to the kiosks and you're buying yourself some gum, and there's ZzzQuil, which has either diphenhydramine or doxylamine, which were two other words that I couldn't pronounce before I learned about this. And they're selling it next to this wholesome medley thing, and you start asking yourself, if they put anticholinergics on this countertop, what's in the wholesome medley that you don't know about? It's rat poison. But this is an example of, I was literally like a couple months ago playing Trivia Crack on my phone, and this comes up. What is the main side effect of diphenhydramine? One of them is drowsiness, which that's the correct answer if you're playing along on the home version. And this is actually interesting because this is trivial, right? This is a trivia app. For a lot of people, this is trivia, not information that they get every day. And so that'll come back in a moment, but I want to now talk a little bit about the Brain Safety Lab, which you have heard about, directed by Chris Callahan. And the lab is a ARC-funded P30 with multiple projects, one of which is to try to prevent or reduce brain harm among older adults related to anticholinergic medication use. And what's really cool, and this is highlighted somewhat by Malaz's statements, is that the approach that we're using is a human-centered systems engineering process, which I've come to know and love through my training, and this is what I do. And so this seemed like a perfect lab for me to be a part of because it uses techniques that I've never really or rarely seen used in clinical research. So here's what the process looks like for those of you who are slightly aware or unaware. Number one, you begin by studying the situation, really understand, if people are taking medications, why are they taking medications? What are the factors that are shaping their performance? And of course, you can study, the prevalence of medications as well, which we often do, but really understanding the system and the process. And you do that so that you can design. Now this, and you notice I try to be funny in part because I'm intimidated by the funny WIPs that have been given in the past. And I'm thinking in particular of Joy Lee. I see her, she's always in the back. I wonder why. She gave an amazingly funny talk, and it was also really good too, where she introduced this thing up there called the Fool's Gold Loaf, some kind of thing. Yeah, she's taking a picture. Which is something that Elvis eats or ate. And he might eat, and he's probably still alive. And so if we want to design that thing, right, we need to do it on the basis of a firm understanding of the people who are going to eat it or use it, the environment in which it's going to be introduced and so forth. And of course, designing is an iterative cycle of creating, testing, recreating, testing. So you might try different meat, maybe tofu inside of that thing, maybe, I don't know, maybe just scrap the whole idea. And then, of course, the next step in this user-centered or human-centered design process is the implementation. And the last one is evaluation. And of course, the nice thing about this process, as I've already alluded to, is that it's iterative. And so you end up having to go back to the drawing board very often because of the results that you found in your evaluation. What I'm going to go through now is a study that we've done over the past few years that really takes us through these steps of design, or studying, design, testing, implementation and evaluation and iteration around anticholinergic medication use in older adults. So when we first began studying the problem, we can say, or the situation, we took multiple approaches, including trying to understand from the clinician's point of view what is going on. But we added an interesting layer, and that's looking at what the consumer or patient is doing in terms of what's going on in their mind as they're making decisions. How are they managing their medications? How do they detect when one has a risk? And what do they do when they've detected it? And so we began by looking at prescription and over-the-counter medications that have anticholinergics by interviewing 24 older adults, Eskenazi Health patients, who were using anticholinergic medications, prescription medications in this case, and sometimes over-the-counter. We also conducted naturalistic in-store shopping observations with contextual inquiry. I'll unpack that a little bit. The idea is we went to CVS and Walgreens and Kroger's and Marsh and stood in the aisles and waited for people to go OTC, over-the-counter medication shopping. And we would observe, where were they looking? And how are they manipulating the boxes, if at all? And were they asking for advice from a pharmacist? And what were they doing? And then for a number of people, we also asked them, can we ask you questions while you do that? So we consented them. And in the aisles where they came to shop, they had no idea they were going to be in a study that day. We asked them, what are you thinking? Because we couldn't observe their cognition. We needed to say, tell us as you think what you're thinking. And they would tell us, I'm I'm running late, I need to pick up my kids, I just need whatever medication, I need to pick one of these things. And we would ask, why did you take Tylenol PM as opposed to Tylenol? They're like, I don't know, because I don't know the difference. There's just the PM sounds good. It's got a pretty picture, things like that. And so we were able to observe people in kind of naturalistic or natural settings in this case, and then ask them questions about what they were thinking as they were performing their tasks. And then, of course, we wanted to have more control. So we performed lab-based simulated shopping with over-the-counter medications where we created what you can see in this picture is an aisle that we created ourselves, made, out of cardboard and duct tape. And actual medication. And if they were shopping for medication to treat either sleep disturbance or pain, and we gave them kind of the opportunity to do what they naturally would do, and we were able to ask them questions afterwards about why they made their decision, what they were considering as they were doing that. We could go back and probe. Well, you picked up the medication, you looked at it, you turned it around, you put it back down, and you picked something else. Why did you do that? The results of this study, by the way, are available in a publication that's just come out, and I'll go through just some of them as opposed to all. So number one, when we interviewed individuals who were using anticholinergics, I mean, these were individuals that we identified and who self-reported using them, but they didn't know the word anticholinergic. So to them, it was really like new trivia. And so they couldn't tell us what it was, what anticholinergic was. They didn't produce the word themselves. And then when we asked, what would an anticholinergic medication mean for you? What kind of effect would it have? They couldn't report that it had any kind of risk. And so that was a really shocking finding. But then for all individuals, we explained to them what an anticholinergic was, and we asked them, would you be willing to consider changing the medication that you're on, given that it's an anticholinergic? And 29%, and you can either say up to 29%, or you can say only 29% said yes, they would be willing to consider it. It depends on your point of view, but about a third were willing to find a replacement, but they actually told us very clearly, only if one exists. So this medication is treating my bladder issues or my anxiety or whatever it is. And so I'd be willing to consider something different, but I still want to treat my bladder or anxiety. So that was really an interesting finding too. And the last finding from these interviews was maybe something that we would expect, but I think is really important to think about as we design, and I'll get to why. And that's that physicians were often reported to us as the primary decision maker around medications. These were older adults, age 65 plus. And 83% said, that if they have a medication of any sort, whether it's over the counter or prescribed, the person they'll talk to is going to be the physician. So this is separate from, how many times they would talk to them or about what, but the physician was the person they would go to for medications of all sorts. And 75% actually thought that the physician was the chief decision maker. What they say goes, and the person who makes the decision is the physician. When we asked people to rank some of the criteria on the basis of which they made over-the-counter medication decisions, we had, I think, 8 criteria, and we were able to get some kind of understanding of what was highly important versus not as important versus in the middle. What I wanted to point out is number one is effectiveness. So as people say, why am I choosing Tylenol PM? It's because it's going to help me with my pain. That was the number one reason people selected a medication. But what I think maybe is a little bit surprising is that risk or adverse events, which we describe as side effects to them, was number 2. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people, that was a secondary consideration, a really important top consideration. The other thing we found is that there were 2 routes of decision making, and this is pretty typical in cognitive psychology, but we were able to see it in the way that people made decisions in our study. The first route is what is often called habit-based, or System 1, for those of you who are fans of Daniel Kahneman and his work. And then the idea is that you just do things based on your cues, the emotions, and kind of just simplify how you make decisions. You don't really think about every single thing. And then obviously there's also System 2, which is about making deliberation-based decisions where you think about the pros and cons of each object. You say, okay, this is an effectiveness of 2 out of 10, and this is a safety 5 out of 10. If you put those together, safety wins. I'm not going to pick this one. So we found that there were 2 types. There are some who were really basing things on what they had last time, or what they were told, and others who were really going through the process and skeptical and thinking about it. So here's what, kind of to summarize what we found. Number 1, people lacking awareness. The physician decides. Safety matters. And then there's these distinctions between habit and deliberation-based behavior. And we went to design some kind of intervention to support that, which would raise awareness, which would help the physician somehow stay in the loop, focus on safety information, and try to transform people from habit followers to deliberators when it comes to these high-risk medications. And at this point, maybe I can just pause and kind of address maybe the elephant in the room, which is when we're talking about prescription medications, the decision is often made by the physician. Patients are deferring to the physician. Why are we focusing on patients, consumers, their families, as opposed to the physician? And the answer to that is, I mean, there's several pieces to it. Number 1, the studies that we have been doing here in the Brain Safety Lab and elsewhere at Regenstrief have actually also focused on physicians. So it's not a choice, one or the other, but rather trying to combine the 2 and looking at the full picture. So taking what at the bottom you can see a two-pronged approach with the clinician and the patient being addressed. And then the other answer is that there's actually some evidence now coming out that the direct-to-consumer or direct-to-patient interventions around unsafe medications are effective. And so we wanted to do that as well. Okay, so I'll go real quickly through what we created. The first thing that we created was a box, a really paper-based intervention with informational materials and a pocket card that could fit in your wallet as you went to the store or you wanted to talk to your physician. And we put that together as an intervention that we proposed to evaluate for efficacy in a clinical trial. Submitted the grant and were not discussed. So what was interesting though about the response from the 3 reviewers who critiqued the proposal was that they actually suggested to us that we should think about phone apps. Whereas we went after paper-based materials because we thought older adults, Ashkenazi health population, what we've learned is apps might not be the right route. So why don't we go with paper? And they were suggesting to us, so we're like, okay, we'll take the money. If you give us the money, by letting us use our apps, and you don't disagree with the potential to design usable technology for older adults, we'll go that route. So we went that route. We were at the same time developing a mobile health application, so technology-based application. And what we were able to do is not only do what I said in terms of the design goals, but also be able to focus on modifying people's health beliefs within using the app and using various behavior change techniques. And we were able to better keep the clinician or the physician in the loop. And then finally, as we were thinking about providing safety information, we were able to personalize some of that information, which is much more possible with an interactive technology. To go into that design and testing stage, of course, we had a big multidisciplinary team. We went from sketching and kind of low fidelity prototypes to higher fidelity prototypes, and we did testing in between. And in addition to creating the app, we created educational videos. And you can see in this picture, we've got a digital storyteller sitting with Chris Callahan, who was one of our voice actors. So we made him famous. And we created these 3 videos that we probably won't have time to watch any of them, but you're welcome to come see me and I'll show you the videos. They're really wonderful. And then we conducted a pilot test to see if these technologies or this particular app was feasible and would potentially even change behavior. And of course, we tested it for usability. So we did 23 usability tests, and then we enrolled 17 of the individuals who were part of those tests into a feasibility trial. And then again, those results are also available in a forthcoming publication. We basically found on the usability side that we had a pretty good usability grade, that even though these were older adults, age 60 plus, a lot of them had not used technology before. Many of them had not used this technology for health-related purposes, but they were able to complete the tasks. So we were able to assess performance-based usability, and we also asked subjective usability questions, and both graded out very well. So they were able to perform the tasks they needed to with the app, and they reported it being easy to use and otherwise usable. And then, of course, the big question for us was does behavior change occur when introducing a technology like this? And we were able to validate we found some support for the hypothesis that we could change people's behavior by asking them to talk to their physician and then getting confirmation in 82% of the cases that they did talk to the physician. We were also able to collect data from the physician as confirmation and found the same rate of people going and talking to their physician about these high-risk medications. So 82% of all participants in the study actually went and did something about this. It wasn't just awareness. This is where we are today. We're actually, again, going back to the drawing board and redesigning this product. You can see these are some of the screenshots that are being that have been created by an expert designer on our team. And of course, we resubmitted the R01 proposal to do a randomized trial to assess the efficacy of the app for reducing exposure to anticholinergic medications and then improving cognition. Now, you have to cross your fingers because we're really close to funding, but we're not quite there. If everybody has wood, knock on it. But we are, okay. I was expecting more knocking. I'm really worried now. Like you haven't been there. I mean, we're so close, but hopefully I'll present again the results of our attempt at securing funding, and then hopefully the study itself. I'll end with just a couple of observations about remaining challenges in our work. The first is this question of consumer and patient-facing interventions and whether we should be addressing the patient route versus going the clinician route. And then if we go both routes, this two-pronged approach, how do we do that most effectively with the patient and the clinician being prepared for the conversation about anticholinergic medications? Technology interventions, there are, of course, multiple ways we can go about this, whether it's apps that an individual has to pick up versus mass media interventions, where we can take those videos and we can put them on YouTube, or we can put them, they are on YouTube, but we can put them on the local, what do people watch these days? Who's the judge? Judge Judy? I don't know. I mean, we can definitely disseminate the videos in different ways besides having to go put them on your phone. And then finally, the breadth of the anticholinergic problem space. I talked about prescription and over the counter, but there's obviously different approaches to the two. I think with that, I'll stop and take questions. We're first.
I didn't see as many references to a pharmacy or a pharmacist as I was expecting. Of the over 60-year-olds that I know, many of them still see the pharmacist as the expert or a single source of truth. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if when you were doing your intervention slide, you'd considered asking subjects who they trusted more about information about these drugs, getting information from a pharmacy or pharmacist, yeah, or their physician.
That's a good question. So we asked two things of people across the study. One is we asked who else they talk to and who helps them make decisions about medications in that first stage. And pharmacists rarely came up. It was surprising. The physician was kind of the chief decision maker, and even though, maybe a couple of people mentioned a pharmacist, rarely did they do so. And then when we asked them, who did you talk to about these medications in the pilot after we had informed them about anticholinergics, given them a lot of education, let them calculate a personalized risk score, you saw something like 93% said that they were going to talk to a physician, and then 82% did. When we followed up, we asked, who else did you talk to? And some said they talked to a family member or a nurse, but nobody mentioned a pharmacist. That was interesting. But you're right. And I think one of the things that I'd point out too is that in the over-the-counter world, it may not necessarily be the physician. In fact, the work that we've seen shows that 50% or fewer share information about over-the-counter medications with a physician, but 82% are willing to talk to a pharmacist about over-the-counter medications. And so I think there might be a different answer depending on prescription versus OTC.
Thank you for a very nice interesting project. I have a question.
I have a question related to your results of the pilot study. Is that closer? Okay, sorry. One of the slides you have about your results, you have like three major things in red, right? One that they liked a lot and they said they're gonna use a lot, right? Number two is that they said they're gonna need a lot of help using. And number three is that they have a steep learning curve. So how do you see managing these two in red with the first one, would you use it frequently? The two in red.
Right, exactly. So the usability
because it's like they contradict each other, right?
Usability results weren't perfect, right? And I think in some ways we should point out that 74% means that 74% of individuals demonstrated or reported adequate, meaning high-level usability on those items. And so it's, a quarter of participants had issues with those. But what do we do about that other quarter, right, the 26%? And do we think that they will not use it? I mean, they might tell us, oh, sure, I'll use it, but if they can't learn to use it, or it's difficult to learn to use, will they stop? So what we do, obviously, is this is what we do. We go back, right, take the findings from the usability portion of the study and translate it into redesign. And as one example for learning to use, you can't see it here, but we built in a tutorial to help people go through. And rather than telling them, figure it out on your own, the app takes them through a tutorial to learn.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you.